Welcome back, my friends, to Courageous Conversations. I'm Dr. Peter Weinstein. I am here with my partner, Dr. Philip Nelson, for a very special edition of this podcast. Phil, good to see you again.
Good to see you, Peter, and I'm glad you made it safe from all your travels. I hope you've rested from the VMX conference, and I'm excited about our guest today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have Dr. Janet Donlin as our guest today. Before we do that, however, I'd like to acknowledge Nationwide for sponsoring us and having the courage to sponsor these courageous conversations.
Also, I want to thank Nicole for keeping us honest and cleaning up the messes that we make during our conversations. I know both Phil and I want to do just show our respect and pay our respects for Dr. George Bishop, who is a friend of the veterinary profession and who we have known for decades, and his contributions at the local, state, and national level are immeasurable. He is a great loss to the veterinary profession.
Hear, hear. Dr. Bishop exhibited exemplary service for both the AVMA as well as the California Veterinary Medical Association. Aside from being a fantastic practitioner in his own right, we like to dedicate this episode in a memoriam of his life and contributions.
And the one thing that Dr. Nelson and I never learned from Dr. Bishop was how to dress, because he's one of the best dressed veterinarians that you would find at any meeting. I mean, the man must have had more ties than Men's Warehouse.
He even fished in his suit. So that's a bit of a stretch, but he did take his pictures in his suit with the fish that he caught.
Now, I've got to say something about Dr. Bishop and add, just because he's such a legend, but saying that, I knew his nickname was Eddie Bauer because of how he looked when he fished. Just a consummate leader, an amazing individual. And I'm very honored that we get to even mention his name during this presentation. So thank you.
Yes, well, and thank you for those kind words. Yes, he was everyone that came to his service, I noted that one of the common things they said that was said about him was no one ever got angry with Dr. Bishop because of his kindness and the way he navigated troubled waters. And because of that, I think he was a positive influence to the profession, just as you are, Dr. Donlin. And we like to turn things over to you now and pay attention to our new guest. Dr. Janet Donlin is the executive director of the AVMA, and we're so pleased to have her here. Dr. Donlin, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got involved in veterinary medicine? I'm sure there are many people who are thinking about becoming a veterinarian, or maybe even changing their vocation within the profession. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of chances to talk about the importance of organized veterinary medicine and how it is reflected on the issues of the day. But let's start first with your personal journey.
Well, thank you. And it really is such a pleasure to be here with you too. You are courageous leaders all, and I really appreciate that. I have a very typical sort of background where I wanted to be a veterinarian from a very young age. I either wanted to be a veterinarian or an archaeologist, and my dad said, Janet, you don't even like to camp, so I think you better become a veterinarian. So he was right. But I started out first as a veterinary technician, which was fabulous. I loved it, went to vet tech school, then got my degree in medical technology because I love lab work. And then went on to veterinary school, Minnesota grad, went out into mixed animal practice, cold Minnesota, and I enjoyed it. But the vet tech program that I graduated from was trying to get accredited by the AVMA. And they asked me to come back and help them. So it's one of those things that I always say to young folks, you never quite know where you're going to be, but people will open doors for you. And when they open those doors, you should walk right through, because I never saw myself as a teacher. Came back, helped them get accredited, got to know the AVMA that way. And that's how I ended up at the AVMA. with accreditation, and I have been involved with the AVMA since I first came in 1991. Then left for a period of time to work for Hills. I was their chief global veterinarian, but Hills is a tremendous sponsor of the AVMA, and so got to continue to work with the AVMA, and now have been the CEO of AVMA for the past 7 years. And you are so right about organized veterinary medicine. In fact, that's one of the key messages I really want to stress during this, because you two are prime examples, and George was. Volunteer. We need you at the local level, at the state level, at the national level. This profession is what it is because of great volunteers and people who care. And so I've just had the pleasure of working with amazing people through the years, and just love it.
So you have had a non-traditional journey through the profession. You started as a practitioner. You've worked in industry, and now you work in the political side, the organized side, the policy making side, or policy responsive side of organized veterinary medicine. Which one did you like the best?
You know, I just honestly love it all. And I've had a chance to meet people, whether it be our veterinarians who are astronauts, or veterinarians who are lab animal, veterinarians who are in research, veterinarians who work for CDC. This is a wonderful profession. And I think what's important is that you work with good people, leverage those good people. Peter, you know that so well. And then you'll enjoy every area that you're in. I am at the stage now, and Peter's in the same place that I am, and Phil, you've been teaching folks all your career. It's great to be able to give back, and I'm at that stage, and I have a daughter who's a veterinarian, as Peter has a daughter who's a veterinarian, so we care so much about this profession now, and we care so much about the future. That's a really great spot to be in.
Yeah, the role of organized veterinary medicine in my world is based upon one of the first veterinarians I worked for. And I think that is really how we build organized veterinary medicine, is one member at a time through word of mouth. It's very much a grassroots effort. So I was working in Southern California in Laguna Beach with Dr. John Hamill, who was at that point in time president-elect or president of CVMA, the California VMA. And I watched him deal with state-related issues in California that, as everybody knows, what happens in California soon trickles down and covers the entire country. So watching him and then having him bring me to local meetings of the Southern California VMA got me started in local organized veterinary medicine, and then you progress to the state level, and more recently have done some committee work and other support work for AVMA. But it really starts with word of mouth, and I think Janet's comments about advocacy we really need our this generation of maybe what we would call baby boomers talking to the Gen X and getting them involved, getting the Gen Ys involved, and now we've got Gen Zs in this population of veterinarians, that we really need to be advocates for them and organized veterinary medicine, because organized veterinary medicine, state, local, and national, protects us and keeps an eye out on things for us. And it's not just political; it's advocacy at all levels. And I think that I'm going to go back even further, because when I went to the University of Illinois as a veterinary student, we had Dr. Irv Small, and Dr. Small essentially would walk through the halls of the small animal clinic, which I always jest was named after him, with a cigar in his mouth. It wasn't lit at the time I was there. It probably was lit in the generation before that, chomping on it with his Marine haircut. And he'd walk up to people and say, "You will be involved with organized veterinary medicine." And that's what I think also set the foundation. So I think being an advocate for it starts at the grassroots level and grows from there. And so I'm, as Janet knows, I'm a big cheerleader for organized veterinary medicine.
Yeah, I think we all share that spirit and burning desire to promote those things that we think are important in our profession. I had similar role models. I worked for Dr. Roland Powell in Jackson, Mississippi, who was an advocate for veterinary medicine during a time when the civil rights movement was really moving through the South, and his penchant was for diversity of the profession, inclusion, and tolerance of all people who wanted to become veterinarians. Then when I went to Tuskegee, my role model became Dr. Walter Bowie, who was the dean at the time and who was a champion for academic medicine as well as for Tuskegee graduates to be included as part of the profession. But in those two roles, I learned the importance of personal advocacy and probably personal courage in order to get some things that may be important but not necessarily accepted within the profession initially, and to keep working at it. It's these type of waters that Dr. Donlin is asked to navigate every day. Dr. Donlin, maybe we should talk about some of the issues that are facing the profession right now that you think are, I'm not going to say the top 3 or the top 5, but are critical in the advancement of our profession. I'm going to allow you to introduce the topics in the order that you would like, and then we can have a free for all on those discussions.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I really want to talk about DEIW, just to follow up on what you're saying, because I think diversity, equity, inclusion, and well-being is very critical. And we know we're in a time where politically it's very sensitive. And when you are in a time when things are politically sensitive, that's a time for leaders to step up and make sure that their voice continues to be heard. And so I think that's a very important thing. I want to make sure that the folks who hear this know about our Journey for Teams flagship program. I think it's critically important. We're really proud of that program. It's an educational program. It's modules. It helps us in kind of short little blurbs learn a little bit more about the important topics of DEIW and what it can mean to us, what it can mean for our teams. And I just think that's critically important. And well-being, you guys, the nice thing about coming back from VMX, Merck announced the results of their 4th well-being study, which we've been involved in. And you and I know well-being, we didn't talk about it much. That wasn't something that we talked about at all. In fact, when the first survey was presented down at VMX, there were 18 people in the room. This time, there were 300 people in the room. And the second hour, there were even more. And the good thing about the well-being study is actually it looks like personally, individually, we're doing better. We feel much more positive. Now, what's interesting is there's kind of a misperception out there. We don't think our colleagues are doing that as well. And so that's interesting, and we have to look at that. But what also came out from the study is that we were much more comfortable talking about well-being. That is critically important. I think the same is true with diversity, equity, inclusion. LaTanya Craig, who you folks know, and who is just our wonderful chief in our DEI area at VMX, she had a packed room. That wouldn't have happened before. So I'm proud of our profession. We have to talk about these issues. We have to make sure we're doing the right things to educate ourselves, to make certain that we're part of the solution. But by focusing on things such as this, we truly can make positive change. And you know this better than me, Peter, because you're such an expert on this. But I think we all know that workplace culture is critically important, and we know it's important in order to retain our teams and that our teams will work well. And that translates to better care. And that's what we're all about. So everything I've been talking about now is all about trying to make certain that we really end up with being able to deliver quality care. So that's all a good thing.
It's interesting because I would suggest 10, 15 years ago, these really weren't even on the radar screen. Maybe even 10 years ago or 5 years ago. So it's the AVMA and the professions change slow, but change as the world around us is bringing many of these topics to our attention globally, because none of these topics are veterinary specific. And I think we've got to recognize that there are well-being issues, diversity issues in human healthcare, in law, and in many other industries. And I think it's great that we as a profession are starting to recognize this and talk about it and look for solutions, immediate solutions, but hopefully we continue to look for long-term solutions so that we find a vaccination against stress or find a vaccination against negative cultures. And I'm using medical terms because it's always fun to do that. But I think we have to find some preventative things that we can do as well. So it has been interesting to watch. So it's interesting, Janet, you talked about DEIW. And last night I heard DEIB on a TV show where the B was for belonging. And if we keep adding, we're going to catch up with LGBTQ with the letters in that. But the things that you just mentioned are all in some way, shape, or form more on the soft skills side of people. They're more right-brained, which is interesting for those of us who are in the veterinary profession who tend to be a little bit more left-brained. So it's really nice to see some of the softening of our profession and working on these issues that impact us as people as a whole and not just the doctoring side of things.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, but I have to say a little bit about Dr. Philip Nelson, who I'm looking at right now. Again, it shows the importance of what one individual can do. Phil Nelson has made such a difference in this area and has driven this area. And his stories are just so inspirational and compelling and force us to look at racism, to force us to look at these important things that need to be dealt with. So it again goes back to the people. It is people that make change, and it's people working together. And Phil Nelson has a whole lot of reason why we are focused on these issues. Peter, why do we focus on practice efficiency? Again, it's the people. So it goes back to be sure you're a volunteer, make certain that you realize you can make a difference in your profession by listening, by wanting to do the right thing, by working together. And I'm just very proud to be on this call with you too.
Well, we're proud to have you. Phil Nelson didn't do any of that by himself, but other than share my own stories, I will say, however, that I want to push back just a little and say that I think these issues were on the radar 10, 20, 30 years ago. They were on somebody's radar, but it does take persistence to expand that scope. But it also takes engagement to expand that scope. And one of the reasons we call this Courageous Conversations is because we want to emphasize the willingness to converse and the willingness to exchange views. And conversing doesn't mean allowing other people to tell what they think the other side thinks. It's about listening to the other side, if you will. If you're going to divide them into opinions and sides, then we must be able to listen to alternative opinions and work through it. And I think part of the problems we're having in our present national conversation is that we tend to listen to those who think like us and listen to them tell us what the others think, which is usually full of inaccuracies or facts or lack of fact or confirmational bias. Just because one thing is true doesn't mean everything else is true of that individual's position. And it forces us to recognize the individual spectrum of thought and ideas, so that we can truly bring to the table all of the good ideas that come from different people. And so wellness is definitely an issue that is has evolved with our societal values as well. Janet, you know that 30 years ago, people who graduated from veterinary school expected to work 50, 60 hours a week in in practice. It's an anathema to think about wellness, personal wellness, at the expense of the practice. And yet I think that is a move in the best interest of society within our profession. And so the Gen Zers and Gen Xers should be applauded for saying, but what about us first? How do we create time for our family and be satisfied with our profession as well? Those are the kind of issues I think that we're working through by listening.
Definitely. And I think that the pandemic really, I think for all of us, kind of forced us to look at what's important and what's not important. And I hope we all learned a bit about that. And I know as an employer, I've got, 180 employees. I have to be a whole lot more focused on what will retain them and what will make certain that they're happy following the pandemic, because they have a whole lot of more options. And that's probably a good thing. But I know, workforce challenges and shortages, what you're talking about, I'm really proud of our rural colleagues, Fred Gingrich and AABP, and our equine colleagues. They particularly have been hard hit with this. It is a real challenge in the rural arena. How do you deal with all of those crazy hours? And they're really taking a hard look at how do we make that work? How can we be flexible? And we're going to be better off for that. Emergency practice, all of those things. We're going to have to be more flexible, more open to things than we have, and that's a good thing. We can figure that out by working together, and hopefully that flexibility translates then to being open to other people's opinions and that too. So openness in hours and openness to opinions. And we can't fire all of our clients, which means we have to learn how to deal with our clients in a good way too. So all of it's related.
There is a network of all of this stuff. I like to think of the pandemic as it was the best of times and it was the worst of times. Mm-hmm. We had a lot of economic benefits that came out of it, but there were some unintended consequences and challenges that impacted us from DEI was brought to the fore, and in my case, it was the George Floyd situation that brought us to this podcast, and it impacted the profession. It's impacted the country. The workplace culture was more evident in the challenges associated therewith as a result of the pandemic, and well-being obviously came out of this. So there was, again, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, but I think the fact is that it brought dialogue out on diversity, equity, and inclusion. It brought dialogue out on well-being and wellness. And it brought dialogue out on practice cultures and teams and the importance of retaining people, because we don't have a large pool to go fishing in, even in Eddie Bauer. We don't have a large pool to go fishing in of employees. I mean, there's a limited number of available veterinarians. There's a limited number of credentialed technicians, and there's not an entire world of people who want to work in the veterinary field. So all of these conversations that have been going on at AVMA and at the state and local levels are those that will institute change. And I'm really pleased to see at the Veterinary Leadership Conference the number of young people that were there, because I think we have to make some generational changes and in all of these topics to create long-term change. This is not a sprint, this is a marathon. And so all generations need to start making the changes to create long-term sustained change and not just a reaction, but a long-term response.
And on that, we're going to stop for a minute, take a small break. And when we come back, we will go deeper into the workforce issues of the profession.
So thank you to Nationwide. Thank you to our guest, Dr. Janet Donlin. Thank you, Nicole. And we'll be coming back and continue our in-depth conversation.
Thank you for joining us for another courageous conversation. Be sure to follow us and check back next week for more.